Hello, board members, and thank you for inviting us to your meeting tonight. My name is Laura Weston, and I'll be co-presenting with Emily Freitas, and we are school social workers in the district. Our topic tonight will be a multi-tiered approach to safe and affirming schools for LGBTQ plus students. And a note on terminology, we will be interchanging LGBTQ plus with queer. Both are appropriate, so you'll hear both throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So we would like to propose several levels of intervention, and starting with Tier 3, this will be at the district level. We're proposing that our district hire a full-time professional LGBTQ plus student liaison. And that liaison would lead a district committee called LGBTQ plus Safety and Inclusion Committee. We further propose that the committee is comprised of administrators, school social workers, and other mental health professionals, counselors, and teachers, and ideally, it would include LGBTQ plus identified staff. Next slide, please. So what would this committee do? Well, the Safety and Inclusion Committee will have a number of duties. I'm going to outline some general ideas here. First, they would hire and supervise LGBTQ plus liaisons at each of our individual schools in the district. They would develop mandatory professional development on LGBTQ plus issues and needs, and that would be taught throughout the year. They would also set explicit anti-bullying policies for sexual orientation and gender identity, and this would go above and beyond our general anti-bullying policy. They would ensure that the staff is informed on the latest state legislation for LGBTQ plus students. And they would work with educators to incorporate LGBTQ plus identities into the curriculum. Now, this would be across the board: history, literature, science, so that our queer students would see themselves reflected throughout the curriculum. And when it comes to sex education, they would be represented in that class as well. So there would be equity in how that class was taught. And finally, they would promote equity for PE, assemblies, dances, clubs, and sports. Next slide. So moving to more of a Tier 2 intervention, we're going to look at the individual schools. And what we're proposing there is that each school has their own LGBTQ plus liaison, as well as a GSA club. And for those of you who don't know what GSA stands for, it's generally Genders and Sexualities Alliance, could also stand for Gay Straight Alliance. And these are student-run clubs, usually with a faculty advisor. And it's a safe and supportive place for the queer student population, although it's open to all students on campus who would like to be allies. And basically, the club does a lot of activities around advocacy and activism. So going back to the school-based liaison, we're proposing that this is a full-time mental health professional. They're on campus to offer emotional support and crisis intervention to the queer student population. They would also be a knowledgeable staff consultant, and they would ensure that the policies that the district has put in place are enforced. In addition, when there are situations that arise, such as bullying and harassment of queer students, they would conduct restorative circles. The liaison would also serve as an advisor and host for the school's GSA club. And in that capacity, they would promote the visibility and the activities of the GSA club, and they would build staff support. Additional Tier 2 options that we're proposing, there are a couple therapies that are really appropriate for this population. One is called Affirm, and that's a CBT-based therapy. It's usually about 8 sessions, and the research shows that it reduces depression 3 months post-treatment. We also would like to propose Proud and Empowered, which is specifically an LGBTQ plus intervention. It's a relational cultural therapy. It involves setting up groups of LGBTQ plus students, closed groups, and the research shows that it reduces minority stress and anxiety. Next slide, please. So what is our rationale for these LGBTQ plus programs? Well, the research is very clear on this. LGBTQ plus students are at high risk for victimization. In all the studies we looked at, reports of harassment, bullying, homophobic, and transphobic remarks came up in the surveys. In addition, they experienced discrimination in school policies and practices. There's also inequity in use of pronouns, facility access, sports, and school events. Most importantly, the research showed that the queer student population experiences higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, substance use, and truancy. Some of the stats we'd like to report to you: 60% of the queer student population surveyed feel unsafe due to sexual orientation, and 45% due to gender expression. 23% of LGBTQ plus youth report a past year suicide attempt. Compare that to 5.4% of their heterosexual peers. And transgender students in particular, they experience 2 times the odds of homophobic bullying versus their LGBT peers. Next slide, please. Further rationale, the research again shows that there's generally a lack of LGBTQ plus cultural knowledge and competence in schools. We find that professional development is rarely focused on LGBTQ plus issues and needs. And research shows that school staff do not feel adequately informed or prepared to intervene when witnessing bullying and harassment of queer students. Furthermore, what we're seeing in social work graduate programs is a lack of specific LGBTQ plus curriculum. So we're graduating new social workers who have not been trained specifically to work with this population. Next slide, please. Oh, back one.
Oh, there we go.
So what would it look like if we built a culturally responsive practice with LGBTQ plus youth in our schools? Well, first of all, teachers and staff would have an understanding of multiple overlapping identities. They would understand the experiences of marginalization that they have almost daily. They would know that transgender and gender nonconforming students face compounded risks, including harassment, assault, and fear-based truancy. And they would have in mind geographic context. Policies and legislation vary from state to state. Family support, a great deal of our queer youth are not supported by their family. They would have an awareness of district and state politics. All of that matters. So Emily and I both interviewed social workers within our districts to get a further understanding of this. I talked to Maria Alshama. She's a district social worker at Oceanside Unified School District. And she says that the time allotted for teacher professional development is fairly low, and it's rarely dedicated to LGBTQ plus topics, nor is it mandatory. Now, I do know that California as a state has implemented the PRISM program, which is online training for LGBTQ plus topics. However, it's my understanding that that's only 1 hour per year, and that's really not adequate. Emily talked to Caitlin Barr, who's a social worker at Buena Vista High School, and she's seeing a real regression in anti-LGBTQ plus slur use among students. And as we know, transgender students are experiencing heightened distress that's tied to our current national political climate.
Thank you, Laura. As she outlined, the need is urgent and the barriers are real. So let's turn now to what the research says and what actually works and how it would look like in real practice. So the research is clear that safe schools for LGBTQ plus students aren't built on one single intervention. They require multiple reinforcing layers. Russell and colleagues identified 4 pillars that together create safe schools: explicit anti-bullying policies, professional development for teachers, GSA clubs, and inclusive curriculum. What's important to note is that none of these work as well in isolation. Mann and colleagues found that curriculum and pedagogical inclusion, which combines staff training, inclusive curriculum, and equal treatment in school activities, was the most effective strategy across 4 different inclusion models studied. And Seelman and colleagues reminded us that something as simple as a student being able to identify a safe adult on campus significantly improves their school engagement. When zero tolerance policies specifically name sexual orientation and gender identity, teachers intervene more and students experience less victimization. So, building on that, Real Smith and Suarez found that when teachers and peers actively intervene in harassment, LGBTQ plus students report a greater sense of safety, community, and belonging, which tells us that bystander behavior matters enormously. GSAs are most effective when they're paired with comprehensive teacher training and restorative justice policies, not when they stand alone. And this is key for our proposal. GSA quality predicts outcomes more than GSA presence. A club that is visible, active, and clearly supported by staff procedures produces real results. Poteet and colleagues demonstrated this with 16,000 students across 45 schools. Schools with GSAs had significantly lower rates of truancy, substance use, and suicide attempts. The evidence here supports everything Laura just walked you through. I want to be honest about some of the challenges that can be faced when implementing this role, because any good proposal has to reckon with those challenges. So the first biggest barrier is time. Educators and administrators are already stretched really thin, and asking staff to volunteer for a district committee on top of their existing responsibilities is a real ask. Related to that is the issues of priorities. Without dedicating funding and protected time, LGBTQ plus students tend to fall to the bottom of the list, which is exactly what our interviewee, Maria Alshama, described from her experience in Oceanside Unified. The current political climate also adds another layer of difficulty, particularly for our transgender students, as state level legislation has created fear and uncertainty. And even where policies exist, discrimination and victimization persists, which is why policy alone is never enough. These challenges are real, but they're also exactly why a dedicated paid liaison position is so important. To make all of this concrete, we wanted to walk you through what a GSA meeting facilitated by a school-based liaison might actually look. This lesson is called Understanding Minority Stress and Building Resilience, and it's designed for LGBTQ plus students and allies. So the learning objectives here would be to understand how minority stress impacts LGBTQ plus students' mental health and school experience. Additionally, it's to identify personal and community protective factors and to build connection and a sense of belonging within the GSA club itself. The lesson will be structured first with a simple check-in. So we will ask your name, your pronouns, and for one word for how you're feeling at that moment. This immediately will signal to the students that this is a safe space where their identity can be honored. The liaison will then deliver a brief 10-minute psychoeducation piece on minority stress, drawing from Myers' framework, helping students understand that their struggles are rooted in systemic stigma, not who they are. The core activity is a protective factors web, where students will map out the people, the places, and the things that make them feel safe. And the liaison will intentionally highlight the GSA club, safe adults on campus, maybe those that are in the committee, and community resources. The session will close with a discussion. What would make our school safer? And what do we wish staff understood about our experience? That question alone can generate powerful data for this liaison to bring back to the committee. And again, we will also wrap up with community resources, the Trevor Project, talk about some of the upcoming GSA events, and remind students about the gender support plan process and availability. On the staff side, the liaison will facilitate a professional development session called What Makes a Safe School for faculty. The learning objectives here mirror what the research tells us is missing. Staff needs to know the law. They need to recognize the impact of their language and practice responding. So we will go over all of those things in this lesson. So that way they can contextualize it and understand the reality of this conversation. The session will open with LGBTQ plus student risk data because sometimes staff need to see the numbers before they can feel that urgency. This will give the purpose to this professional development session. The Know the Law segment covers the California Fair Education Act and basics like correct pronoun use and name change procedures, which again, our interviewee, Maria Alshama, noted many counselors still don't know. The heart of the session is case scenarios in small groups. 3 realistic situations that push staff to apply what they're learning rather than just passively receive this information. So, for example, a student uses an anti-LGBTQ plus slur in class. How would you respond? A transgender student asks to use a different name. What are the steps? A student confides they feel unsafe because of their identity. What resources can you offer? It will close with the debrief and again, a resource list for the teachers and staff. Both of these sample lessons I have just shared will be facilitated by that school-based liaison, which will illustrate why that position needs to be a skilled mental health professional. They're doing clinical work, psychoeducation, and advocacy all in one role. Finally, let's talk about how we know if this is going to work. We are proposing a multi-level outcome framework. At the student level, we will track LGBTQ plus student surveys 3 times a year, measuring perceived safety, belonging, and whether they can identify a safe adult on campus. We will also track truancy rates and reported bullying incidents, desegregated by LGBTQ identity. At the staff level, surveys administered before and 6 months after each professional development training tell us whether readiness is actually improving over time. We're also tracking whether mandatory PD is happening at least 3 to 4 times a year, because if it's not, the whole system will break down. Curriculum modification across all subject areas is a longer-term indicator. And at the program level, GSA membership and attendance over time, alongside the GLSEN National School Climate Survey, used as an annual benchmark, gives us a consistent, validated way to measure school climate change. Taken together, all of these measures will tell a story that goes beyond compliance. They'll tell us whether LGBTQ plus students actually feel safer on campus. Thank you so much for your time and your commitment to creating safe and affirming schools for all students. If you have any questions, you can reach out to myself or Laura. And here is a list of our resources, our references that we use to build this presentation.